Let's talk about supplies that you need to do an embroidery project. First thing that you need is fabric. When you're just getting started, woven fabric works the best. It's got a warp and a weft, and so there's a grid built in and a structure to this kind of cloth that will help you create designs. There's not a lot of stretch to it, and that helps. It'll keep your stitches from warping too much. This is a linen woven fabric. This is also linen. This is cotton, and this is another linen. So you could find anything that is woven. Cotton and linen or blends of those types of fabrics work the best. Next thing you need is thread. I like to keep a lot of different things on hand when I am getting ready to sew or do an embroidery project. So I'll keep different sizes of yarn and thread, and different colors, different textures. That's what I like, just so I have lots of options. This is quilting cotton. I keep some of that around. This is just some sewing thread. These are some weaving yarns that I have that are just extra. So I just save all my little pieces. Embroidery floss is often like this, where there are multiple strands that you can take apart. And if you hold the bottom of it, it's much easier to pull one piece out. It's metallic embroidery floss. Super fun. So it's good to have options. The next thing that you need to have is scissors. I love scissors. So I have a lot of different scissors, but for embroidery I would say you need a pair of shears, some sharp shears. These are Fiskars, and embroidery scissors. They're just smaller, and so you'll be able to do more detail work with these. They're very tiny point. There are some that have curved tips. I don't have any like that. But you're going to need something like that. Let's talk about needles. So the next thing you're going to need is needles. And I was just going to say, let's look in my sewing bag. This little pouch I keep sewing stuff in. This is where you're going to see the needles I use the most, because I just stick them in here on the side. So I have a variety of needles here for just regular sewing and mostly for embroidery. There are a variety of tapestry and embroidery needles. So these are either called embroidery needles, chenille needles, or tapestry needles. And the most important thing to remember is that when you're shopping for needles, the bigger the number, the smaller your needle is going to be, the finer it's going to be. So that's a rule of thumb for sizing. Another thing to remember is that when you're choosing which ones you're going to need, think about the fabric and the thread you're going to use. So here, this needle here, this tapestry needle, has a rounded tip, has a ball point edge. So while the head is large, the eye of the needle is large enough for, a larger yarn, this is going to struggle to get through a finer weave fabric. It does work, but it will be not as smooth and easy ride for me. So See, there it won't go through. Okay. So I would probably, if I was going to work with something like this, just one of these strands, I would pick something like this because it's large enough for the yarn to go through the eye, and it has a pointed end. So it's large enough at the eye that when I go through my fabric, it's not going to fray my threads as much because it's a large enough needle. Okay, so I would say if you don't have any needles yet, get an assortment, and then you'll have a lot to choose from, and you can decide what you like to work with best. So on the subject of needles, we can also talk about, well, first, the other thing you definitely need is an embroidery hoop. So I have a lot of different sizes. There are ones that have a screw tension and they are plastic. There are wooden ones. There are also hoops like this. There's like spring loaded, just like a metal spring here. These are super handy when you want to gently pinch your fabric in here. I think that these are a little more gentle on fabric, this particular type of hoop, and they're really easy to use. If you're working with a really fine, lightweight fabric, you maybe would want to wrap your hoop with some fabric first before you sandwich it in between your hoops, just so that your fabric is protected and the fabric around the edges doesn't get stretched. So the purpose of this is to help you keep your fabric taut while you're trying to stitch. It's just much easier to do this way and to stitch intricate patterns here than it is when you are holding it with your hands. Like, you can really only work with this small area if you're holding it with your hands, and you're more likely to have puckering and warping happening. So the hoop helps to keep everything straight. I personally like to work with a bigger hoop, so that's why I have big ones. I like room to play. So other things that you want to have on hand to do embroidery work that I like to personally to have on hand is beeswax. This is fantastic for threads that are maybe a little more wiry. And if you've never used beeswax before, you're going to cut your piece of thread that you want to sew with, and you can put it on the needle, and then you're going to just hold it down over the wax. And this is just going to add a little bit of weight to the yarn. It makes it a little bit sticky, but it'll help keep it from fraying and unraveling, and it will go much more smoothly through your fabric, and it won't knot up on itself as much. So if you have a fine, wiry yarn or thread that you're working with, I would recommend using this, keeping this on hand. Another thing that I keep around for embroidery projects are marking tools. There's a large variety of marking tools available that you can find in like quilting sections of the craft store or online. But I usually have tailor's chalk. This just brushes right off the fabric, washes right off the fabric. This is a chalk wheel. There's chalk inside of here that will mark lines on the fabric. It doesn't do curves super well, but it does make nice lines. There are different kinds of water-soluble pencils that are different colors. So depending on the color of your fabric, you may want to choose according to that. or there are also different colored markers. Some of them erase with water, and some of them, like this one, and some of them go away, just they erase in the air. So you want to pay attention to that, because if you've drawn a very intricate design on your fabric. Okay, so other than marking tools, those are just handy to have when you have a design that you want to transpose onto your fabric. Another thing that you can do that with is something called stitch and ditch. This it comes in different sizes, and there are different kinds of this, but basically what it does is it sticks to your fabric, and then it washes away, or can be pulled away, or will come away in the dryer, or whatever. There are many methods for it ditching and coming off of your fabric, but you can draw a design on it, or yeah, so that's what I use it for, is to either stabilize a very fine fabric or to transpose a design. So if I have a very intricate letter, for example, that I'm monogramming something, then I might draw it on a piece of paper like this and then attach it to my fabric. And then when I'm done embroidering, I can just get rid of that stabilizer, and you won't see it anymore, but it's much easier to keep up with an intricate design that way. Another thing to talk about is thimbles. So this is the one that that I use the most. It's just a little jelly rubber thimble. Thimbles are worn on your middle finger when you're sewing. It's something that you just have to get used to doing if you want to. It will save your finger in the long run with all the sewing that you're doing. So as you're sewing, this will help to push up your needle through the fabric. You'll find that you won't have as many little pokes and divots in your fingernails or your fingertips, and then when you go to get in the garden in the dirt and you go, what are all those little spots on my finger? They won't be there because you'll have used your thimble. If you don't like wearing one, there are some that don't have tops. There are also things like this that just stick onto the tips of your finger, and they're just like peel and stick and removable. So there are a lot of different options with thimbles, so I would encourage you to try different ones, see what works best for you. Okay, thanks.